It's 11 o'clock. I hope you had a nice coffee break and you are energized for the second part of this online conference on how to engage SMEs in the energy transition and the green transition. Obviously, there's multiple perspectives to the discussion, and before the break, we had the perspective of the SMEs. But our first slot of the second part of the conference regards the perspective of the city, because obviously cities have an important role to play in engaging SMEs to achieve more sustainable policies. And while we are looking for Jan Aerts and Camille CALLENS to show up on video, let me first already introduce them. Jan Aerts is the program facilitator of Leuven 2030 with a specific focus on non-residential buildings. So obviously there's plenty of SMEs involved in that part. And also from Brussels, we have a representative from the capital of Europe. Camille CALLENS is the project manager of Brussels 30-30-30. Welcome to you both. I see you in front of me, so that's a good start already. So good morning, Jan. Good morning, Camille. I can imagine that only a few people of the audience may know the actual organization you are working in. So what I'd like to do to start off is ask you, can you shortly describe what your organization exactly is about and what you are doing? And I would propose to start with Jan.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you for being here, because when I first heard about Innoveas, I didn't know what it was, and I was wondering if it would be interesting to be here, but it definitely is, and I'm very glad to be here. So I'm Jan Aerts from Leuven 2030. Leuven 2030 is a non-profit organization that strives for a climate-neutral future for the city of Leuven. So we started off with 60 founding members, and by about 7 years later, now we have 600 members. And yeah, in this way we can represent the inhabitants, the companies, civil society organizations, knowledge institutions, and public authorities. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the work of Leuven 2030 is all about building partnerships, cooperation, and using the network to establish projects. So one of the things we worked on last year was a roadmap. We developed a very big roadmap, which includes all the actions that are necessary to achieve climate neutrality, and it's divided into 13 programs. And one of these programs is my program on non-residential buildings. Mm-hmm. So non-residential is a big group because we include healthcare, education, semi-public organizations. Those were fairly easy to connect to our program, but we have more difficulties with the small offices, the trade sector, shops, stores, and hotels, restaurants, pubs, those kinds of small companies. Yep. And I'm also running an ELENA project, which targets also the non-residential buildings. So we can fund studies in energy efficiency for 24 partners. Mm-hmm.
That's already quite impressive. Thank you, Jan. Camille, how about Brussels 3030?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So yes, the 30-30-30 City Climate Challenge project, was launched in 2019, so by BESI, and BESI is the Brussels Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So it was launched in 2019 at a pretty particular moment, I would say, because the new regional government took office at that time, and it was also at that time, a few months after that, they published their regional contribution to the National Energy and Climate Plan. So it was a good momentum to actually say, okay, the private sector is going to take the lead in Brussels, take a leading role in climate policy by also proposing itself the climatic transition, I would say, to the city. The project, so the objective of the project is to reduce CO2 emissions in the region by minimum 30% by 2030 with 30 collaborative projects. So that's why it's called 30-30-30, of course. And we say collaborative project because the idea is really to use a new approach, an innovative approach of collective intelligence, of collaboration and co-creation. So we work with a whole set of partners. A lot of them are actually corporate companies, so bigger companies, but we want to be inclusive in our approach because we truly believe also that that is the only way that we can really come to a holistic CO2 emission reduction in Brussels. And so we also include SMEs, we also include startups, we include the government in our approach, we include public administrations, cabinets, etc. So the real philosophy is to be as inclusive as possible. We work on a whole set of different types of projects relating to different thematics. So most of them are, of course, related to mobility and buildings, which account together for more or less 90% of CO2 emissions in Brussels. So 30% almost respectively for mobility and 60% for buildings, so residential and tertiary together. And so we work on those topics mainly, but we also work on other topics such as sustainable food and urban farming, on sustainable logistics, and on circular economy. So circular economy is the focus we want to set also for 2021. But yes, that's a short introduction, but I'm pretty sure you have a lot of questions. So.
That's a broad scope, and it's clear that the both of you are mobilizing local actors, different types of stakeholders on a city level to drive that change. So that's a quite interesting an interesting approach, of course. I would like to ask first Jan, could you give some more concrete examples of what your organization has been doing and to engage those SMEs in Leuven?
Yes. First, maybe the ELENA project, which was for us a big scale up for the organization Leuven 2030, and it gained also some credibility for us. So we receive 1.5 million euros from the European Investment Bank to support organizations with studies. Only studies for energy efficiency. And within that, we have also a frame contract for energy audits. So both for the complete building as for HVAC. And typically prices were 2,500 euros or 5,000 euros for scans. And we could fund them for 90% with the funding from European Investment Bank. So the price was fairly low for the organization, but there is, because it is an ELENA project, you have to reach a certain leverage, which is in our case 20. So for each euro you get, you have to invest 20 euros in the actions that follow after the energy audit. So each of these partners had to sign a commitment statement, and that made it a little bit a challenge. Yeah. A second project we are doing now is a building performance contract. It's an evolved version of the energy performance contracting. So here we are, it's also within a European project, the CIRE project, and we are including residual value. So typical energy performance contracts have payback periods of 10 years maximum, and so they achieve also a maximum of 30% of energy reduction. But by including this residual value, you can apply measures like outside insulation, which have typical payback periods of 30 years or more, by making this at the end of the contract period, the value visible. And what we also try to do now in this project is to build a consortium that will make one contract with an ESCO instead of one public partner who makes this this contract. And this is particularly good for smaller companies because they are too small to attract an ESCO, and by building a consortium, we can try to achieve this. Yep. We're also including comfort performance in the contract, which is also important, as we heard already earlier on, to include the performance of employees and those kind of things. And then a last project,
things going on. Yes.
Yeah. A last project we are doing now is together with VOCA, the Flemish Chamber of Commerce. It's a charter where we try to involve more SMEs, and they have, in this charter, they will commit themselves to 3 actions. One of them is the carbon footprint in the first year. And then second action that reduces their footprint, of course. And then we hope for a third action that aligns their core business more with our roadmap. So not only their scope 1 and 2 emissions, but really the
full scope,
their business.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jan. Camille, I can imagine that a lot of things are happening in Brussels as well. Can you elaborate a bit more concretely on which projects you are driving to move SMEs forward?
Well, yes. So the Brussels Chamber of Commerce is focusing on different types of initiatives to help SMEs in that regard. I would say there's 2 types of initiatives really, and the first type is a more general set of initiatives where the Brussels Chamber is acting as a sort of facilitator to help the companies paving their way through existing tools and services for CO2 emission reductions, and so one of those services that we provide is the environmental. I wouldn't call it an audit because it's not. It's sort of an environmental diagnosis for startups and SMEs, but also like the retail sector and restaurants and commerces in Brussels, really like small actors, to give them an idea of what can be done in a first step to reduce their carbon footprint, the carbon footprint of their building. So it's very quite low level, and it's really focused more on like the low-hanging fruits and the quick wins they can set up in the first place. And it's not necessarily only focused on energy efficiency. It can also be focused on their waste management, so the prevention of waste, the reduction of waste, on the supply chain, on the mobility of their employees, and then of course also on energy efficiency of the buildings. And so it's more like focused on the in-house reduction of their CO2 emissions. And the second type then of initiatives, and this is really what 30-30-30 is related to, is to help companies in transitioning to new, more sustainable business models. And that's the work that we intend to do with 30-30-30, is to really make different types of companies come together to develop the new business models, to test them and deploy them within the Brussels region and beyond the Brussels region afterwards, if possible. And maybe to give a concrete idea of how we do this, there's this one project that we launched, which is an interesting one because it shows quite a few things that are interesting to take into account. On the political level, but also on the level of where the private sector really takes the leading role, and that is the project of Electric Avenue, which is the objective of the project is to deploy 300 EV charging stations along the Avenue Louise. So for those, I think a lot of people in this meeting know Brussels, I guess, and so the Avenue Louise is really interesting because it's a particular axis, because it's a good mix of both residential and tertiary buildings, both bigger companies and SMEs, and so the charging needs of the employees and the residents are quite complementary to each other, and that allows also to mutualize the need and to optimize energy efficiency in that area for this. But it's interesting. I would say Electric Avenue is interesting in the sense that it was a sort of we all know that the electrification of the fleet is a sort of like chicken or egg problem, especially in Brussels, I would say. I don't know how it is in other cities, of course, but until now there was a lack of clear strategy coming from the regional level, from the political level, until recently. And so we were lagging behind in terms of infrastructure, and that's where, as I said, the private sector really took the lead. So the EV charging stations are going to be installed in the properties of real estate owners, whether they're big companies or smaller companies, and so they're really going to respond to a direct need of the employees, because it's responding to a legislative need. So that's one of the projects that we are working on, also closely together with the political level. Another example where we really try to involve SMEs as much as we can is a project where we are currently trying to develop a tool to accompany co-owners and syndics. I don't know if that's a word, but I think so, syndics, in the replacement of their boilers in residential buildings. And that's one of the projects that we develop using slow design sprint methods. And there's still remain a few important stumbling blocks, such as, for example, this financial model, and how can we actually convince syndics that it is important to make this energy transition. Yes. So that's just a few of the projects that we're working on.
Thank you, Camille. You, without knowing, you already anticipated my follow-up question, actually, because I can imagine that SMEs are not that easy to engage. So could you shed some light, the both on you, on which obstacles you are facing to engage SMEs? Jan, maybe you can start again.
Yes, I can, but I heard this morning already so many things about Gabriele and Clemens, and they mentioned almost everything that all the problems there can be. So yeah, one of the things I found out myself already a few times is that the energy bill is not a major concern of most SMEs, and that indeed the cost of materials and personnel is 100 times higher. So the major concern of the SMEs is attracting clients and keep them happy, and attracting personnel and keep them happy. And if sustainability can strengthen these challenges, then there is a way in. Then you can start talking about energy, but not as the first thing you start with. So then, therefore, it's always good if you approach a company or you are approached by a company to understand with whom you are talking and where the main focus of sustainability lays in the company. So is it somebody who is responsible for environmental compliance, or is it a bit higher? Is it about marketing, green marketing, or maybe HR, research and development, or on the top, really the strategic long-term vision of the company? And also when we were talking about energy audits this morning, the cost of the audit becomes less important the higher up you are within the hierarchy of the company. For the guy who is responsible for environmental compliance, it might be a huge budget, but if you're embedding it within HR, for instance, then it's just a small cost.
It's peanuts, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Camille, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jan that a lot has been said already this morning, and especially the point regarding the narrative, the change, the transition in the narrative is necessary to make SMEs understand really that it's not necessarily just a question of cutting costs, or a legal obligation sometimes, but it's also they should perceive it as a strategic decision to improve the value proposition to the customers, really. So I totally agree with that. But yeah, of course, until that happens, I would say we still stumble on the few barriers, which are the lack of time, the lack of human resources, the lack of financial resources, and sometimes even when there is financial resources, SMEs don't want to be bothered with the administrative burden of, for example, subsidies and that kind of stuff. So that's really like, we see it all the time also with the projects, even with bigger corporates. We see that people just don't tend to see it as their first full-on priority, and that they lack of interest to look beyond those stumbling blocks and to look on a longer term strategy. So yes, the change of narrative is for sure necessary, but we also should, and I speak for myself when I say that as a Brussels Chamber of Commerce as well, to help them paving the way to the different opportunities there are there, because SMEs don't tend to be as informed as bigger companies with regards to the innovative and sustainable concepts and models that exist. When we look, for example, at the opportunities when you mutualize certain things. So SMEs still look much at ownership in general, but there's a lot of opportunities with the sharing economy. There's a lot of opportunities with the circular economy. There's interesting concepts such as what is done in nature, what can you do with biomimicry, all that kind of different stuff. That's stuff that we as a Chamber of Commerce that we want to introduce those concepts to SMEs, and that's also what we do with information sessions, etc., and that kind of stuff. But we also want to help them with the legislation. So, for example, I was talking about the National Energy and Climate Plan. By 2030, the regional government of Brussels, at least, confirmed that it will only support SMEs that can integrate circular concepts into their business model to apply for public tenders, for example. So there is a big bargaining. I don't know how to say, like the buyer power for the public sector that is interesting for SMEs to really comply to those different criteria. But the same exists for certifications. Like, for example, for the construction sector, we have the BREEAM certification, but we also have EMAS certification, which all of you know here, of course, which also allow companies and SMEs to apply for public tenders at the level of the European Commission, for example. So there's a lot to be done also by the public sector for SMEs to be willing to comply to this to this legislation. So
Yes.
I think that's also what I'm talking about here is also a part of the solution, I would say.
Yeah. So it's clear that the narrative is a key element, and changing that narrative, showing the benefits of that transition is important, and that the cities have an opportunity through local regulations to engage SMEs into a more, let's say, compliance-driven way to move them forward. Now, as you know, there's been some discussion on a clustered approach to transform SMEs, not one by one, but really by grouping them, for instance, in a business park or an entire street. Is that something that you both have experience with, or do you have some thoughts to share about? Jan, can you chime in?
Yeah, we tried this already with mixed success. So, for instance, the Muntstraat is one of the streets in the historic center of Leuven, with lots of restaurants, a bit like Rue de Boucher in Brussels. And there was this action with all the restaurants together, but it was fairly limited to what's actually achieved. But it still lives a bit on. So maybe we can take this group again for another project in the future. But then for an entire business park, we are now setting up a climate kick project in Haasrode, which is the biggest business park in Leuven. And but it's not only about energy, it's really a holistic approach. So it will be about mobility, which is a major concern of the companies over there, the mobility issue. But also green infrastructure, heat island effects, circular economy, all these things clustered in one big project. Yeah.
Yes, Camille, do you have experience to share in Brussels?
Yes, so the 30-30-30 City Climate Challenge project is of course also new to all of the different companies that are joining the project. So we're testing the approach of collective intelligence, etc. And of course the partners that join the project know that this is the approach we want to set up, and they're also willing to go along with the experience, I would say. And so it's still we're still in the testing phase, and so we're seeing if it's going to work or not, but also our partners are convinced of the benefits that can come along with it. For example, another project, but where you really see this clustered approach is the project that is called Up for North. Which has the objective to renovate the whole northern district, so the business district really of Brussels, which is known to be an area that is dense in tertiary buildings. But since a few years, and especially with the pandemic and stuff, the area is transitioning to more mixity and to more multifunctionality. So new projects are rising that are mixed residential and mixed tertiary, and that also allow for more multimodality. So it's not just the buildings that are rising in that area are not only focused on like a more sustainable and more circular approach in their renovation and to more energy efficiency. They're really also focusing on how can we make it more, how can we make it more accessible also to sustainable modes of transport. So it's really a holistic approach in general, and there's a lot of opportunity. This clustered approach, like geographic clustered approach, creates a lot of opportunity again to mutualize certain things such as mobility and to optimize energy usage, especially in these dense urban areas. So that's really specific for Brussels, I would say. So we could focus, for example, on setting up district heating networks, which allow to mutualize the energy needs around those buildings. So that's really something that is tested now. So I can't tell you if a clustered approach really works and really is the one solution. We're still testing, but I think it has a lot of interesting. It's an interesting approach.
Yes, clear. Thank you both. I see the clock is already showing 11:30, unfortunately. I had several other questions for you, but I think we'll have to do that another time because we have several other perspectives to share. I would like to thank you, Jan and Camille, for participating and wish you all the best at Leuven 2030 and Brussels 30-30-30. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.